really encouraged people to vote for Trump because the alternate was communism. And I think under the current administration, it was a big win for freedom and for Bitcoin. Do you know what a 6102 attack was when they confiscated gold? So they basically confiscated everybody's gold. And of course, I think it only had like a 30% rate of compliance. Like most people didn't actually turn their gold in. They said that you had to turn your gold in, and they labeled you a criminal. And a lot of Bitcoiners felt like, given the trajectory that we were on prior to the most recent election, that was a very real possibility. They do something where they try and confiscate gold, but as you mentioned, it actually can't be confiscated if you have it in cold storage. Whether you've lost it in a boating accident, or you just are unwilling to comply, or you move somewhere with more friendly jurisdiction, they can try to compel you to hand your Bitcoin in, but they can't just turn it off the way that they can with the dollars and with the banking system and dollars and things like that. You mentioned you don't, not feeling like the United States was at risk of facing a currency crisis the way that other countries have.
Oh, well, I think it could eventually lead to that, but I think it will be the last to go. But I think that, well, the main thing is I don't think they're going to go down and collapse maybe they will, but I don't think they're going to be stopping and seizing everyone's wealth and making it so you can't leave.
Right.
But that's kind of the theory. But yeah.
Okay, so that's like the unconfiscatable piece of it. But the other piece of it is, it sounds to me like you're like still measuring all of your gains in the dollar, right?
So
you're up
if the dollar
X%.
collapsed, so I am a theory that the dollar is getting printed and it's eventually going to
Right.
maybe not hyperinflate like that, but it will definitely deteriorate like it always has. But my
Yes.
thing is that will just make the price of Bitcoin one to go to infinity, and MSTR I believe will just go to even more infinity. So I don't think that's going to be bad for MSTR.
So you think it's going to stay pegged? So if the dollar, as the dollar is devaluing, the value in dollars of your MSRT shares is just going to go up and up and up.
Yeah, I think that, let's say Bitcoin went up 100x and the dollar, I think MSTR would go up about 1,000x. So that's my opinion. But so I think that would be bullish for MSTR personally.
So say your total assets, right? So you're looking at incremental or exponential increases in a dollar priced. But if we flip the script, and I don't know if you've seen, Bitcoiners say like 1 Bitcoin still equals 1 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So if you use Bitcoin as your unit of account and you say, well, instead of trying to increase the portfolio to go up 10x or 1,000x or whatever it is in the dollar price of the portfolio, and you look at it in terms of actually holding the asset itself, you still believe that the shares are ultimately going to be worth more.
So I'm a big believer in MST, or Bitcoin's the best asset. Everything's going to go down in terms of it. I think
right.
Literally
so
one of
why
the only
wouldn't you
things
want
that
to
can
hold it itself?
Oh yeah. Well, that what I was going to say was I think the only thing that could possibly beat it is MSTR, because I view it as more Bitcoin because they're always increasing Bitcoin per share. So think about it, in 10 years they might have over double the amount of Bitcoin per share that they do currently. So every share I own of MSTR, the amount of Bitcoin in it is always increasing. I think last year the Bitcoin per share increased 74%, and then this year we're only a month in and it's already up 4%. So yeah, I think for hardcore Bitcoiners, in obviously they just want to own Bitcoin, but if you think of MSTR in terms of Bitcoin terms, it is always appreciating. Because when they run the ATMs, they're always diluting less than they're buying because they have a premium. So then it's basically a Bitcoin acquisition company. So the Bitcoin per share is always increasing. So even if you think of it in terms of Bitcoin, I think it's a great investment for me personally. And then long term, I think that there's cool things that they can do with my Bitcoin. I have a space I do with this guy named L.A. Dozer, who does the AI art for Michael Saylor. And he makes jokes about long term, every MSTR shareholder is going to go to Mars and get castles because they're going to need perfect money on Mars. And then strategy will develop Mars with cool real estate. But yeah, I think they could become a Bitcoin bank or something. So I
Okay.
think there's some value in owning the most Bitcoin in the world and in having the Bitcoin per share always increase. So that's kind of my theory. But yeah, I
Right.
understand where you're saying where Bitcoin
What
it's
ha- what happens if something happens to them, right? So you're saying they, as in the company of MicroStrategy.
yeah.
So you're placing this massive bet, and we know that that's what you're doing. You know that that's what you're doing, and but it's still at the end of the day a company run by a person or a board of directors, right? And
Yeah.
what happens if something happens?
That's true. That's I guess there is a human element that Bitcoin doesn't have where it's
Right.
increased risk, but I'm a risk taker and
You
I
think
like the company. So
you think the increased risk, like, so you're saying the trade-off basically is increased risk because there's a company and people involved, but
yeah.
on the flip side of that, that increases the potential for upside in dollar terms.
Yeah, I think, well, even if you think in Bitcoin terms, I don't plan on
Mm-hmm.
doing this, but I think if someone were to buy a bunch of MSTR today, say, let's say
Right.
you bought 97K dollars worth of MSTR shares, which is one Bitcoin today, I
Okay.
think theoretically in 10 years, you might be able to buy three Bitcoin with that because I think it's going to outperform. So well, with that being said, I'm not gonna for all these really Bitcoin maxis. They get upset at me because
Right.
I'm not. I just got into it and I like MSTR and I don't really own any Bitcoin, but I think that long term MSTR could outperform Bitcoin, and then you could. I don't plan on doing this, but you could rotate some of that and buy even more Bitcoin. But I guess what
All
was
right,
the question?
I have a
I
question.
lost track.
I'm going to ask you a new question. So, okay, I think I understand. Like, I understand where you're coming from. Have you ever seen those charts for houses? And
Yeah.
the house, is worth this much. So, if you go back like 5 or 10 years, you would have probably needed 100, 1,000 Bitcoin, and you would have gotten a house. And then you do the dollar comparison. And that rift is only going to grow, right? Because the dollar is worth less and less and less. And Bitcoin is worth more and more and more. So your thesis basically is that you think holding those shares ultimately is going to lead to the ability to purchase more Bitcoin.
If I were to, I plan on being a long term shareholder, but maybe I'll
You're
buy
never
Bitcoin.
selling.
Maybe I'll buy, yeah, I don't plan on ever selling, but maybe I'll
Okay.
buy some Bitcoin separately down the road with, I don't know, new
Mm-hmm.
sources of income. But no, I think if you look at the last 5 years, literally the only thing
Right.
that's been able to outperform Bitcoin is
Mm-hmm.
MSTR. And that's because they're the first company that realizes that Bitcoin's a once in a lifetime technology and they're utilizing that
Right.
in their. So yeah, I think that I pretend I'm really dumb and I think the current trend could continue and MSTR will be the only thing that outperforms Bitcoin. And that being said, I think Bitcoin will have a crazy future and it could go up 100 times in fiat terms, like you said, in the next 10 years. And yeah, everything will go down in terms of Bitcoin, except for maybe a company that realizes everything goes down in terms of Bitcoin and always buys more Bitcoin.
So everything goes to zero against Bitcoin except MSTR.
Yeah, I think companies that are on the Bitcoin standard where they're actually
Mm-hmm.
viewing things, because Michael Saylor, big hardcore Bitcoiners should appreciate what he's doing because he does things in terms of Bitcoin. He says Bitcoin per share always increases.
Right.
So the TradFi guys and the Wall Street guys say, well, no money was made because you can't even price that in dollars. Well, he's saying hardcore Bitcoiners should be able to appreciate that every strategy he's doing is leading to more Bitcoin per share. So he's actually in his last earnings call, he actually dumbed it down a little bit for TradFi guys. So he normalized
Okay.
the Bitcoin per share in terms of like the Bitcoin yield. He did a Bitcoin
Right.
dollar gain so that they could value it. But yeah, I think that even if you're pricing everything in terms of Bitcoin, because everything goes down in terms of Bitcoin, MSTR is increasing. They're the company that's actually going out and saying everything goes down in terms of Bitcoin. Therefore, I want to buy as much as I can and increase Bitcoin yield. So yeah, I think long story short, I think even if you are valuing things in Bitcoin, I think there's
Mm-hmm.
real value that MSTR possesses. And I think you could think of it separately from it's not really more Bitcoin, which Michael Saylor says. Well, I guess it is, but it's kind of a company that's just it's a Bitcoin acquisition company. So if you believe in
Sure.
real estate, you
Mm-hmm.
might invest in a company in 17, I don't know, 1850 that decided all they're going to do is buy up all the New York City real estate. That
Right.
company might do better buying that stock than buying a real estate property. So that's kind of what I view it as. I think it's a Bitcoin acquisition company that also holds it, and they're never selling.
There's no one-to-one redemption, is there? Like you can't say, okay, now give me my Bitcoin.
No, no, no. That's
You'd
not the
have to exit
plan.
to dollars.
You'd have to if you. I don't plan on doing this, but if your end goal was to buy Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to sell it, and then you use the funds to buy Bitcoin, and then you'd probably have to pay taxes or whatever.
Right. Yeah, you have to pay capital gains tax on the sale.
Yeah.
So you are not concerned about not holding Bitcoin itself, the real asset.
As of this time, I'm just trying to make
Good.
it out of my parents' basement, and I like MSTR shares.
And what do you need to do to get out of the basement? You need to make an X dollar figure. So it's dollars that you need.
No, I just need to get to the point where I feel like it makes financial sense. But right now, I'm trying to save money, so I want to have as many MSTR shares as possible. So,
You're trying to save money to buy more shares, not more sats. Man, when the dollar hyperinflates and you look back on this, you're going to be like, man, I wish I'd listened to these people.
Well, I don't understand. Even if the dollar hyperinflates,
Yeah.
all the Bitcoin companies are going to go to the moon too. I don't understand the theory of
Well,
that.
maybe. I mean, maybe. It's a possibility, right? But it's also a possibility that the entire stock market crashes and burns to the ground. Then what do you do?
Yeah. If Bitcoin goes to infinity, I'll be fine regardless. But
And, well, that's not true. That is predicated on the existing structures staying in place, right? Because ultimately, what you're buying are shares,
oh yeah,
and the shares are traded on the stock market. So you need that structure to stay in place,
yeah, I guess so. And then
right?
I got my
So
dad to
the
buy some iBit, so
right.
I guess you have to trust BlackRock with that. So I guess I don't own any. I own very few actual cold storage, so I can see the argument, but I don't know. I think this is all very bullish for everything I've for if the dollar collapses and Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
goes to infinity, I think I'd
Right.
be very happy personally. But we'll see.
What if they shut down the stock market, or they make some new rules like, oh, you can't cash out, or you can't, we're
If that
worried
was
about
going to
your
happen,
safety.
I
Yeah.
feel like if that were going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
there'd be some signs and I would I don't know. I just don't especially with Trump in office and Elon running, I am just very
Right.
bullish on America right now. So that's not even a concern I have right now. But I think if I were living in Canada with Trudeau or Australia, maybe then I'd
Yeah.
value this more. But as of this
Are
point,
you
I really like the way our government's heading with Doge and kind of cleaning it all up.
So, I could not agree with you more. Like, I got a lot of shit for supporting Trump, and everybody was like, oh, whatever. But the thing is so I lived in DC for 12 years. I've seen a lot of election cycles, right? And I'm super bullish and like white pilled on everything that's happening right now. Um, but the United States works on these 4-year cycles, right? So, what happens if we end up or just let's go back and let's just say Trump didn't win
Yeah.
and the new communist regime came in and put a bunch of like rules in place. You mentioned Canada and what happened with Trudeau and stuff. Are you familiar with what happened with the Canadian trucker movement?
Yeah, I actually talked about that a little bit in one of my videos. So that's kind of
You did.
the argument for, but probably nobody saw it, but it was just a small video. But I said that cold storage, the reason it's so
Yeah,
valuable is, I mean, the government said these people are doing protests, which by the way were right. They were protesting like communism, COVID policies,
right.
and the government just seized their funds and allowed them not to get paid
Yeah,
basically. And that's where people were sending money in or sending Bitcoin or using Bitcoin cold storage. The government,
right.
even if they wanted to, they couldn't have touched it.
So you've heard Bitcoin is the new gold rush by now. As world leaders on all sides have endorsed it as the future of money, and now you're looking to get started, we'll show you how. It's actually easier than you think. First, go to your nearest Byte Federal ATM and turn your cash to coin. Byte Federal has over 1,200 locations around the country with the highest daily limits. Go to our website, bytefederal.com, to find the nearest ATM to you. Log in to any wallet, then create an account, deposit your US cash, and instantly convert it to Bitcoin. That's it. We are the only US manufacturer and operator in the Bitcoin ATM industry, and our US-based live customer service is second to none. Go on, give it a whirl, and don't get left behind. Click the link below.